Hello everyone, today on Homeside DIY we're going to go over 5 basic tools you need just to start working on your cars. So with that, let's go over them. Okay, so first, basic set of deep well sockets from 10 up to 19 millimeter. Something you can use, and I'll say metric. Most cars from 2000 up are almost all metric. You go back from 2000 back into the 90s, you'll have a little mixture of the two. If you're working on really old vehicles, those are all inch, but if you're working on those, you probably have a full set of tools. Now, the reason why I suggest deep well versus short sockets. If you're talking about those short sockets versus the deep wells, one of the big advantages, let's say you have a bolt with a nut that's on it. Well, when you go to put it over it, if the nut is down too far, you're never going to get to it. That's where a deep well allows you to reach farther down the bolt to unloosen the nut. Now, if you want to buy a long and a short, more tools is always a good thing. Trust me, you'll buy plenty of tools in your time. Also, they make a multi-point, and they make 6-point, and that is they call the points. When the bolt fits in there, you can see here where the bolt's actually all the way around on each of the points of the bolt, where a multi-point only hits on the high spots. It's not to say it's bad, but you can buy multi-point or 6 points. Most of your sets you buy are all going to be multi-points. If you have stuff that's super tight, I would go 6-pointers. If you can get a set that's all 6-point, I would do that. But either one will work just fine. Now, they come in different sizes. So this is a 3/8 drive, and they're talking about the size of the ratchet. This is a 3/8 drive ratchet. Now, your ratchets can come in longs, shorts. There's multiple different lengths of ratchets. This is a longer handle, so you can get more leverage. They come in shorter handles. I prefer the longer handles, but there are times when you don't have the room for it. Shorter works. So in most cases, you'll be able to get by with most. Once again, if the bolts are tight, you'll appreciate that longer handle. So 3/8 drive ratchets. They also make them in quarter drive, which is once again the size where the square where the socket attaches. They make them in 1/4 inch, and they make them in 1/2 inch drive, and they're just bigger. That's all they are. And they make them 3/4 drive, 1 inch drive. Good place to start. A good 3/8 drive metric. I like Craftsman. If I break it, to take it back. There's a lot of philosophies there about that, but this one will be up to you. Okay, moving on. And as part of the ratchets, I would pick up a couple little extensions. Trust me, you'll use these to reach down inside of things. They make them really short. I've got one that's a couple foot long. You don't use it very often, but they're handy. And they also make them a breaker bar. The breaker bar doesn't have a ratchet on it. It's meant for just pure leverage. So 3/8 drive, deep well socket, and possibly some extensions if you can afford it. Okay, wrenches. Now this is just a cheap set of wrenches. I bought these. I carry it in my bag when I'm out on the road, because if I lose one, oh well. But once again, basic metric wrench set. Now they come in multiple different ways. It's a box on one end, open on the other. Just a regular sets should do you fine. So your basic 15 millimeter wrench, Also 15mm wrench, you can see the length difference, meant for leverage. And they have them in gear wrenches. Now gear wrenches are nice because they're kind of a crossbreed between the ratchet and the wrench. If you can afford the gear wrench, I would go gear wrench. If not, just a basic set. Any more, they're not much more. But the nice thing about these is when you're in tight spots, they come in very handy. And if you tighten or loosen, you just turn it over. I wouldn't buy the ones with the lever that you flip back and forth. Those almost always break. And I know I'll get comments on that. So these, if you want to loosen, or you turn it over, you want to tighten. Less mechanism to break. So a basic set of wrenches. So this set here goes from 6mm all the way up to 19. Now most of the sets are almost always missing a couple key wrenches. So this one goes from 17 to 19. And the one you always need is an 18. So pick up an 18mm wrench as well. So on cars, it's 18mm and 10mm. They use a lot. If you own a Jeep, you're going to use a 10mm almost everything. 10s, 18s, and 21mm. But basic in wrench set, do you fine. Once again, you could always buy more. Okay, something I'll throw in there is just a universal. It's always good to have a crescent wrench around, but a crescent wrench really should be your last resort. Everybody uses these as their first resort and ends up stripping out nuts and bolts all over the place. But quick tip, when you're using these, when you adjust it, your pressure, if I'm tightening this, should be on the fixed jaw, not the movable jaw. What happens if you do it on the movable jaw, this gets loose and loose. Before you know it, you start rounding off the, in this case, fittings or bolts or whatever. So get a wrench. They have their purposes, but don't rely on these. Try to use a wrench. Okay, next. Screwdrivers. We covered these on 5 tools you need for your house. I happen to really like these multi-tools. You can get just about everywhere you need to. Now you have your regular screwdrivers. These are always nice too. If you have to do a little prying with them, a regular is a little better. But if you're going to get these, get a set with straight blade and Phillips head, where these have straight blade and Phillips, large and small, straight, large, and small. And you can take it out and use it as a driver as well. So they're pretty handy. So if you can get a multi-tool, get a multi-tool. Okay, so that's ratchets, wrenches, and screwdrivers. So that's 3. Number 4 is just a pair of pliers or a pair of vice grips. Now I like vice grips. Pliers have their place. Vice grips are nice, especially if you need to hold something. You can lock these on. Let's just say I need to hold this bolt. I can adjust this and I can hold it, lock it, whatever I need to do. If this is wanting to spin on me, I can lock it and let it maybe bump up against a frame while I take this off. On the trail, it worked nice. Pinch off brake lines or whatever you need to if it's broke. That's emergency fixes only. But a good pair of vice grips. If you don't have vice grips, get pliers. Vice grips come a couple different ways. They'll have needle nose, and they have these with the rounded jaw and straight jaws. It's going to be your pick. I use the rounded jaws because there's a flat on the end, but that's up to you. Okay, lastly, top 5. Let's see. So, almost to the end here, guys. A pair of Allen wrenches. Valuable. Now, metric set. Allen wrenches are just used to drive Allen heads. You see them more and more on newer vehicles. Not as much on the older ones. But this is one of those things. If you buy one set, buy 2. because these things are like socks. They disappear. You'll find out real quick which ones you use a lot because they're gone. They just disappear. So I would buy the metric set. Typically they come in a 2-pack of inch, which are typically yellow, and metric, which are typically red. And I would buy the longer ones, and I'd buy the ones with these ball ends. And here's why. So one end, if they're straight, they have to go straight on. But let's say you have to be at a little bit of an odd angle. You can be at a little bit of an angle with that ball end and still operate. So ball end, Allen wrenches. And there is a crossover for those. They make Allen wrenches for your sockets as well. You don't need a set. I'm just showing them to you. And lastly, you're not a carpenter, you're a mechanic. Dead blow hammer. These things are worth their weight in gold. If you got to tap on something, adjust something while you line up a bolt hole. I like these Lixies. It's got removable heads on them, so that if you wear one out, you order a new one. Now they make the big dead blow hammers that are orange. They're pretty inexpensive. Buy one of those as well. But these can come in very valuable if you need them. All right, and then as kind of a bonus, if you're ever going to change your oil, you're going to want a oil filter wrench. Now there's 2 or 3 different sizes. All of our cars use the smaller size, which is pretty common nowadays. 2 of my vehicles actually take a cartridge, which doesn't use a wrench at all. So I would go to the auto parts store and talk to the clerk about your oil filter and get a wrench for it. I've had this wrench for I don't know how many decades, but they work just by when they tighten up, it just pinches on strap, and this one actually will pivot to get me around things. So oil filter wrench, it's something you definitely could use. And last but not least, as a bonus, top 5, you got to have more than 5 because it's tools. Torx heads, you will use these on modern day cars. Torx for if you ever have to take off your calipers on your car. A lot of trim bolts nowadays are all Torx. You eventually will use these, and some of these you can buy at Harbor Freight. I know they're not the best quality, but on things you don't use a lot of, I don't necessarily mind it. On stuff I'm going to use a lot of, typically if it's something I'm going to use a lot, I'll try to buy a Craftsman. Snap-ons are good tools, Matcos are good tools, but it really comes down to your budget. Alright, so to recap. 3/8 drive, deep well socket, 3/8 drive ratchet. I prefer long. Right? Pair of pliers or vice grips. I would go vice grips. Set of end wrenches. Right, basic set. If you can go gear wrench, I'd go gear wrench. Allen keys, I would get the ball end. If you get the inch and metric set, it's the route I would go. And hammer, I like these Lixies with interchangeable heads, but dead blow hammer. Alright, so that's all the tools. Alright, so that was another edition of Homes How Do I. We went over 5 tools that you need just to get started working on your vehicles. We had a couple bonus tools in there. You can't have enough tools, so it is what it is. But pick up those. They're fairly inexpensive. I'll put some links in the descriptions below. So if you have any tools you have questions about, you could ask me those questions in the comments as well. I'll reply back. Or if you have specialty tools that you need, I can do the same there as well. So with that, another edition of Homes How Do I. 5 basic tools you need to work on your car. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you on the next tip.